The wind had teeth that night, biting through wool and hide like a hungry animal. Snow swept down the Montana high country in thick, blinding sheets, rattling the shutters of a lone cabin clinging to the side of a ridge. Inside, a big man moved with the deliberate economy of someone who had learned to survive by being careful. Vin Dalton was a mountain of a man, broad shoulders beneath a worn brown vest, a dark brown cowboy hat shadowing silver-threaded hair. His world was firewood, traps, and silence. He was tightening the spring on a beaver trap when it came, the sound that didn't belong. Not the moan of the wind, nor the groan of pine timbers shifting under snow weight. A thin cry, high and raw, sliced through the storm. It froze him in place, heart hammering like a startled stallion. At first he thought it might be a cougar, but then it came again, words barely carried on the wind. "Mister, please, come." Vin was on his feet before he realized it. He snatched his coat, jammed his hat on his head, and grabbed the lantern. The cold hit like a punch as he opened the door. The storm roared in, snow stinging his face, stealing his breath. Still he waded out into it, his boots plunging knee-deep, following that faint, desperate voice. 20 yards from the cabin he saw her, a tiny figure half buried in drifts, dark hair crusted with ice, wearing a thin, pale blue dress under a ragged coat far too big for her. Her small arms flailed once before she stumbled forward, falling to her knees. "Mister," she gasped, looking up at him with eyes wide and shining with tears that had frozen on her cheeks. "You have to come. Mama won't wake up." He dropped to one knee in the snow, scooping her up as easily as if she were a stray kitten. Her body shook so hard he could feel it through his heavy wool. "Easy there, little one," he said, his voice rusty from disuse. "You're safe now." She clutched at his coat with desperate fingers. "No," she sobbed. "You don't understand. Please. Mama won't wake up. You have to follow me home." The words hit him like a hammer. For an instant he was back in another winter, kneeling beside a small bed, holding another child's fevered hand. Katie's hand. He had begged God then the way this child was begging him now, and God had been silent. "I'm here," he said, more to himself than to her. "I'm here this time." She pointed with a mittened hand toward the dark shapes of pines in the distance. "There. Mama's there." He shifted her in his arms, feeling how light she was. "All right, sweetheart. Show me." The storm fought them every step of the way. Wind-driven snow blinded him, drifts clutched at his boots, but the girl kept lifting her head to whisper directions in a voice that grew fainter with each passing minute. Past the big rock, where the trees make a circle. At last he saw it, a slant of gray against white, a crooked chimney coughing thin smoke. The cabin was more a shack than a home, built of mismatched boards, one window covered with oiled paper instead of glass. The door hung ajar despite the storm. Inside, the smell hit him before his eyes adjusted to the dim light, the sweet, stale odor of sickness and something else beneath it, heavier and final. He knew that smell. Death had a signature a man never forgot. A stone hearth smoldered weakly in the corner. Rough furniture crowded the small space. On the narrow bed lay a young woman who would never rise again. Her honey-colored hair spread across a worn pillow. One hand lay across her chest, fingers curled around a plain gold ring that caught the flicker of firelight. The child wriggled in his arms. "Mama," she said softly, hope trembling in her voice. "I brought help. The nice man's here." Vin swallowed hard. She didn't understand. How could she? At her age, death was an idea without edges. He set her gently down and crouched to her level. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Hope," she said after a moment with a small lift of her chin. "Hope Elizabeth Turner. Mama calls me her little blessing." "Hope. Of course. That's a beautiful name," he managed. "How old are you, Hope?" She held up 4 fingers, then added her thumb. "Almost 5. Mama says I'm getting to be a big girl." Vin's throat tightened. Katie had been almost 5 when he forced the thought back. "Hope," he said carefully. "Your mama's very sick. She's not going to wake up." Her brows drew together. "But you're a grown-up. Grown-ups can fix things. Mama said so." He felt tears sting his eyes for the first time in years. "Some things can't be fixed, sweetheart. Not even by grown-ups." She looked from him to her mother and back again, her lower lip trembling. "Is Mama going to stay asleep forever?" "Yes, little one. I'm afraid she is." For a long moment she was silent, small hands twisting together. Then she whispered, "What happens to me now?" The question hung between them, heavy as the storm pressing against the thin walls. The nearest town was 3 days' ride, and the passes were choked with snow. Even if he could get her there, what then? An orphanage? Strangers who might not care. As if sensing his uncertainty, Hope moved closer and slipped her small hand into his. "Will you take care of me? Just until Mama wakes up." His chest tightened painfully. She still didn't fully grasp what had happened, still clinging to a hope that this was temporary. How could he explain death to someone who had barely begun to understand life? "I'll take care of you," he heard himself say, the words coming from some deep place he thought had died with Katie. "You don't have to be scared anymore." Her face lit with the first real smile he'd seen from her, a fragile beam of sunlight breaking through storm clouds. "Thank you," she whispered. "I knew you were nice when I saw you. You have kind eyes like Papa did." Outside, the wind howled. Inside, something shifted in the silence of his heart. He didn't know what the future held, didn't know how he would care for this little girl who needed so much more than he thought he had to give. But for the first time in 5 years, he had a reason to try. He wrapped the mother's thin quilt around Hope's shoulders and lifted her once more into his arms. As he stepped back into the storm, the cabin behind them seemed to collapse inward with emptiness, a place that had held desperation and now held only loss. By the time they reached his own cabin, she had fallen asleep against his shoulder, exhausted. Her small head rested under his chin, her breath warm on his neck. Inside, the fire still glowed, and he carried her to his chair, sitting with her cradled against his chest. His cabin had been built for one chair, 1 cup, 1 plate, but tonight it held 2. She stirred once in her sleep, her fingers finding the edge of his vest as if to anchor herself. In a voice no louder than a sigh, she murmured, "Will you be my papa now?" The words cut through him like an arrow. He sat frozen, staring into the fire while snow hissed against the windows. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, a wounded man and a lost child began the first fragile steps toward becoming something like a family. The morning after the storm broke was quieter than any Vin Dalton had heard in years. Snow blanketed everything, muting the world. It was the kind of silence he'd once craved, a silence that asked nothing, promised nothing, revealed nothing. But this morning, it didn't feel like peace. It felt like waiting. Hope stirred on his lap, curled under the quilt he'd wrapped around her the night before. Her small body was warm and heavy, her breath rising and falling against his chest. She didn't wake as he slowly stood, careful not to jostle her, and carried her to his cot. He laid her down gently, covering her with the thickest blanket he had. The cabin looked different now. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. The same single chair beside the fireplace, the same stone hearth, the same high shelf where he kept the only useless thing he owned, a little wooden horse wrapped in leather. But now there were boot prints in the snow inside the doorway, a blue ribbon on the floor, a ragged coat draped over the back of the chair that was clearly not his. He set about building the fire back up, coaxing it into a hearty blaze. Then he filled the kettle, set it on the hook, and began sorting through his limited stores. Porridge. That was something a child could eat. His stomach twisted with the memory of the last time he'd cooked it for someone other than himself. When Hope awoke, she blinked at the room like she was trying to remember where she was. Her hair stuck up in every direction, and one cheek was still pink from sleeping against the coarse wool blanket. She sat up slowly, looking at him from across the room, wide-eyed and quiet. He offered her what he hoped was a smile. "Morning." She gave a small nod. "Is this your house?" "Cabin," he said. "But yeah, it's mine." She looked around. "You live here all by yourself?" "I did," he replied, stirring the pot. "Not anymore, I guess." She considered that a moment, then got up and padded over to the chair by the fire, sitting cross-legged in it like she'd claimed it for her own. Vin didn't correct her. He sat on the floor instead. The porridge was plain, but he added a spoonful of honey from a dwindling jar and slid the bowl to her. She took it, held the spoon awkwardly for a moment, then began to eat. Between bites, she looked up at him. "Mama used to put cinnamon in it," she said softly. "But this is okay, too." He nodded, unsure what to say. Her voice had no complaint in it, just memory. They didn't talk much while she ate. He wasn't much for conversation anymore, and she seemed to know when silence mattered. When she finished, she looked toward the fireplace where the flames crackled warmly and said, "It's cozy here. Cabin holds heat well, that chimney stone all the way down." She looked at the high shelf, her eyes squinting. "What's that?" He followed her gaze and saw the edge of the leather-wrapped bundle poking out from behind a tin mug. "Nothing," he said, perhaps too quickly. Hope didn't press. Instead, she slid from the chair and began exploring, as children do, touching the wooden table, peering at the heavy kettle, kneeling to examine a stack of firewood like it might hide something magical. She was careful, respectful in a way that surprised him. He'd expected noise, chaos, questions. But Hope moved through the room like she understood it was someone else's world she'd entered. He watched her fingers linger on a small quilt folded on the end of the bed. She smoothed the edge, then looked at him. "Did you make this?" "No," he said, voice tight. "My wife did. A long time ago." Her eyes stayed on the quilt. "Is she sleeping forever, too?" He looked away. "Yeah, she is." Hope didn't ask more. She just sat down on the edge of the cot, pulled her knees up, and held her arms around them. For a long while, neither of them spoke. Outside, the wind had died, but the trees still creaked, the sound of weight shifting under snow. Later, when he wasn't sure why, maybe because she was so quiet, maybe because the room felt too cold again, Vin stood and reached up to the high shelf. He took down the leather bundle, unwrapped it, and set the carved wooden horse gently on the table. Hope gasped, eyes wide. "It's beautiful." He said nothing. She stepped closer, almost reverently. "Did you make it?" "I did," he said, voice low. She reached out, then paused, looking up at him. "May I?" He nodded. Her small hands lifted the horse carefully. She turned it over, ran her fingers along the legs, the flowing carved mane. "What's its name?" "I never gave it one." She considered, then smiled softly. "His name is Thunder, because he looks strong and brave." She galloped the toy across the table, making soft clicking sounds with her tongue. And just like that, the cabin changed. The walls didn't move. The snow still pressed against the windows, but suddenly there was laughter, a small voice narrating Thunder's adventures, hooves clicking against wood, and a girl who had every reason to cry, playing. He sat back and watched her. Noticed how she turned the wooden horse to face the fire like he needed warmth too. How she whispered secrets to him, how she hugged him once, quick and instinctive. The ache in Vin's chest, the one he'd carried for 5 years, shifted. Didn't vanish, but moved. Became something else. Not grief. Not yet. but maybe the beginning of remembering how to feel something other than loss. By nightfall, the cabin was a different place. Hope had found a rhythm, helping him fetch firewood, insisting on stirring the soup even though she nearly spilled it twice. She asked questions now. Do bears sleep in winter? What happens if you sneeze with your eyes open? Can you really fry eggs on a rock in summer? She sang under her breath as she folded a rag into a makeshift bed for Thunder near the hearth. She found an old tin cup and pretended it was his water trough. Vin watched her, this child who had walked through a blizzard to ask a stranger for help, who now hummed lullabies to a carved toy. The cabin had one chair, one bed, one man. But tonight, it had two hearts beating inside it, and he couldn't remember the last time that had felt true. That night, after she fell asleep in the cot, curled beneath the same quilt she'd asked about that morning, Vin sat by the fire and listened to the wind shift again. It carried a different weight now, not emptiness, not warning, something softer. He rose and tucked the blanket higher over her shoulders. She stirred but didn't wake. One hand rested on Thunder, the other clutched a corner of the quilt. He turned to go, but her voice stopped him. Soft, muffled, half in sleep. Do you think Mama knows I'm safe now? His throat clenched. He looked down at her, cheeks flushed from the fire, lashes dark against pale skin. I think she does, he said. Hope nodded once, eyes still closed. Then her breathing slowed again, even and peaceful. Vin sat back in his chair and stared at the flames until they blurred. He didn't know what would come next. Spring was months away, the roads were still buried, the world still wild, but tonight a child slept safe in his home. And for the first time in a very long time, that felt like enough. The snow had stopped. Not all at once, but in that quiet, reluctant way the mountains sometimes granted a truce. Soft flurries drifting down into silence, the wind dying into hush, the air still and watchful. The world outside Vin Dalton's cabin looked like a painting, white ridges against a pale blue sky, pine trees sagging under the weight of the storm that had passed. Hope stood at the window, small fingers pressed to the glass, breath fogging the pane. She didn't say anything, but Vin could read it in the set of her shoulders. Something inside her had settled, and something else was stirring. We should go, she said at last, not turning. We have to say goodbye. Vin didn't need to ask where. He already knew. He packed a canvas sack with tools, a shovel, some food, and a length of flannel. The trail back to her old cabin wasn't long, but the snow would slow them. Hope didn't complain. She pulled on the mittens he'd dried by the fire, adjusted the scarf he'd wrapped around her neck, and tucked Thunder into her coat pocket. As they made their way through the woods, Vin kept one hand on her shoulder, steadying her when she slipped, guiding her through drifts. She didn't cry, didn't talk much, but her small boots moved forward with quiet determination, one step, then another, like she was carrying something too heavy for her size, and carrying it anyway. The shack appeared just as they'd left it, slumped beneath the trees like it was trying to vanish. The door creaked on its hinge as Vin pushed it open. Inside, the air was colder than memory, and the silence thicker. Rachel Turner still lay on the bed, wrapped in the same worn quilt. Time hadn't touched her, but the world had moved on. Hope walked in slowly, then stopped at the edge of the bed. She reached out and touched her mother's hand, cold and stiff beneath the blanket. I brought Thunder, she whispered, and the man who helped me. His name's Vin. Vin stood back, hat in hand. He didn't interrupt. Some moments belonged to the living and the dead alone. After a while, he stepped forward and knelt beside Hope. We should do this right, he said gently. You want to help me? She nodded, eyes shining with tears she hadn't let fall. Behind the cabin, near a stand of wind-sheltered pines, Vin found a patch where the snow was thinner and the ground a little softer. Still frozen, but workable. He chopped and dug, hands blistering inside his gloves, muscles burning with every stroke. Hope gathered pine boughs, laying them in a small pile off to the side. They wrapped Rachel in her best dress, the one hanging behind the door, and folded the quilt over her. Hope placed Rosie beside her mother, whispering something Vin didn't quite catch. When the grave was ready, Vin lowered the body carefully. Hope placed the pine boughs on top, then stood in silence while he built a cairn of stones, one by one, each chosen with care, stacked not just for weight, but for meaning. When the last stone was in place, Hope looked up. Mama liked the part about the house. Vin blinked. What part? The house of the Lord. He nodded, the words rising from memory. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Hope's hand found his. They stood like that for a while, just the two of them, the hush of the forest deep around them, like the trees themselves were mourning. Inside the cabin, the cold had crept into every corner. Vin busied himself gathering anything useful, dried food, clothes Hope could grow into, the small tin of medicine bottles. Under the bed, in a wooden box, he found a stack of letters worn soft at the edges. One caught his eye, a letter from a law office in Denver dated months earlier. Rachel Marie Turner, widow. Debt collection. Seizure of property. Final warning. Vin sighed, slipping the letter into his coat. Another piece of a puzzle he didn't like. On the shelf above the hearth, he spotted the family Bible. Its leather was cracked and brittle, the spine nearly split. Inside were pressed wildflowers, neat cursive notations in the family register. Rachel Marie Patterson, married James William Turner, 1880. Hope Elizabeth Turner, born 1881. James William Turner, died March 15th, 1885. But something else was written beneath it. Different ink, a different hand. Jack Brennan. The name hit Vin like a cold blade between the ribs. He flipped back through the letters, found another envelope, unsealed, never sent. Inside, a letter addressed to Dearest Margaret, Rachel's sister. I've hidden the truth as long as I could, she wrote. Jack wasn't James. Not really. I found out after he died. He was wanted, Vin, for robbery, murder. I didn't know. Not when we married, not when Hope was born, but after the accident, I found the poster. Vin's hands trembled. I've kept the gold hidden, Rachel continued. He said it was from mining. I believed him. I was a fool. I know they'll come looking. If something happens to me, please protect Hope. Don't let her pay for her father's sins. He lowered the letter slowly, heart pounding. Hope's father hadn't died in a mine. He'd been Jack Brennan, wanted across 3 states for a bank job in Denver, a job that left 2 guards and a bystander dead. And the money. He turned, eyes scanning the room. Where would she have hidden it? She wouldn't leave it in a drawer, not buried outside. It was winter, and she'd been sick. He thought of what Hope carried everywhere, what she'd placed beside her mother. He went to the bed, carefully unwrapped Rosie from the quilt, ran his fingers along the stitching, the seams. Stopped. The doll was heavier than it should be. Inside, sewn into Rosie's back, was a bulge, soft but dense. He took out his knife, sliced gently. Inside the stuffing was an oilcloth pouch. He unwrapped it. Gold coins. Dozens of them. He stared, the weight of it pressing into his palms. This wasn't a few dollars tucked away for hard times. This was a fortune, tens of thousands in stolen payroll. Suddenly, the silence around the cabin felt different, charged, watching. Hope walked in, still clutching a pine cone. Is something wrong? Vin quickly folded the cloth, tucking it away. No, he said. Nothing's wrong. But it was a lie. Everything had just changed. Hope came closer, frowning. That's Rosie. Mama said she'd keep me safe. Vin knelt and held her hand. "She will, sweetheart. But we've got to be careful now. Real careful." Outside, the last light of day was bleeding into dusk. Somewhere far beyond these trees, someone would still be looking for Jack Brennan's gold, and if they found Hope, they'd kill for that gold. The days stretched longer as February settled in. The cabin stayed warm now, thanks to a well-fed hearth and a girl whose laughter softened every hard edge of silence. Vin Dalton found himself rising with purpose, not just to hunt or to chop wood, but to teach letters on the back of a flour sack, or to help braid yarn into makeshift doll hair when Hope asked, "Can Rosie have a sister?" Most mornings, she sat cross-legged on the floor, tongue between her teeth in concentration, practicing her alphabet with a burnt stick on old paper scraps. Her S still looked like a snake trying to escape the page. Vin corrected it with a gentle hand and quieter patience than he ever knew he had. But at night, when the girl slept curled under quilts, her arm thrown over Thunder or Rosie, the weight of the oilcloth pouch hidden beneath a loose floorboard gnawed at him. Gold. Stolen gold. A fortune people had already died over. Some nights, he lay staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind press against the cabin walls, wondering what kind of man he was now. The kind who keeps a child safe at any cost, or the kind who hands that same child over to lawmen, or worse, hoping to unburden himself. He had options. Ride south through the pass when it thawed, bury the gold deeper, or turn it over to the authorities in Fort Braddock once spring cleared the roads. But there was no safe option. Not really. Not when Hope was the daughter of a wanted man, and maybe the only person left alive who knew where that gold had gone. Vin had read Rachel's letter more than once now. She hadn't just been scared for herself. She'd been terrified of what would happen if the truth came out about Hope's bloodline. Hope didn't ask about the gold. She didn't seem to notice his worry at all. To her, this was simply life now. Wood smoke and stew, letters and laughter, her feet tucked under Vin's leg as he read from an old farming almanac she pretended was a storybook. But one night, the wind shifted. Vin had always trusted his instincts. They'd kept him alive during too many winters, too many border town brawls and back-alley deals. So when the hair on the back of his neck rose just after midnight, he didn't question it. He slid from the cot without a sound, stepped into the window. The moon hung low, casting silver across the snow. All looked quiet. Still. But quiet in the wild wasn't always peace. He moved to the door, careful not to creak the hinges, and stepped onto the porch. The cold hit sharp, but he didn't feel it. He listened. Then he saw them. 3 shadows moving slow through the trees, mounted men, no torches, no sound but the shift of snow and the occasional snort of a horse. Vin backed inside, heart thudding. He bolted the door and grabbed the rifle from the mantel, old but well kept. Loaded. He knelt beside the cot where Hope still slept, peaceful and unaware. They'd found them. He moved quickly, pulling the rug back and lifting the floorboard. He grabbed the oilcloth pouch, tucked it inside the stovepipe's clean-out compartment, the last place anyone would look until he had a chance to move it farther. Then he doused the lamps and pressed his back to the wall beside the door, every breath slow and measured. The hoofbeats stopped. Voices murmured, too low to catch clearly. Then one barked a laugh, coarse and familiar. Vin's jaw clenched. He didn't know the man, not by name, but he knew the type. Jack Brennan's kind, dusty trail riders who shot first and robbed second, hunted gold like wolves hunt meat. The laugh came again. "I told you, that bastard had a daughter, and Rachel wouldn't have gone far. This is the kind of hideout he'd have picked." Another voice. "You sure she's here?" "She's here. I can smell it. Brennan's kid and that gold." Vin stepped forward, cocking the rifle just loud enough for the sound to carry. "Next one of you speaks dies where you stand." A beat of silence. Then boots shifted in snow. One of the men cursed. "We don't want trouble." the leader called back, his tone oily. "Just looking for what's ours." Vin didn't lower the rifle. "You're trespassing. I'll give you one chance to leave." A pause. Then a cold chuckle. "You got a little girl in there, mountain man. One with dark hair and a porcelain doll." Vin's stomach turned. "She's not yours," he growled. Another step forward, bold. "She's worth more than the gold." Vin's finger tightened on the trigger. The man kept talking. "Jack Brennan told me all about his kid before he got himself shot. Said she was his legacy. Said Rachel knew how to hide her. But she slipped, and now she's ours." Vin fired. Not to kill, just a warning. The shot exploded into the dark, sending ravens screeching from nearby trees. "Next one's not a warning," hooves thundered. Snow kicked up as the riders fled into the trees. One shouted something he couldn't make out. Vin didn't move until their sounds had vanished down the ridge. Back inside, Hope was sitting upright in bed, wide-eyed and pale. "Was that thunder?" He crossed the room in 2 steps, knelt by her side. "No, sweetheart, just a noise in the woods." She leaned into him, trembling. "Is it the kind of noise you fix?" He wrapped his arms around her. "Yeah," he said. "It's the kind I fix." But even as she laid her head on his shoulder and drifted back to sleep, he stared into the flames of the hearth, knowing something had changed. They hadn't come for the gold. They'd come for the girl. Dawn barely lit the sky when Vin Dalton woke to the sound of snow crunching beneath hooves. They were back. He moved with practiced quiet, boots sliding over the wooden planks without sound. He peered through the narrow window. The figures were there. 3 again, but different. One of them limped slightly, favoring his left leg. The one Vin had winged last night. But they weren't riding off this time. They'd come to finish what they'd started. He didn't wake Hope with his voice. Instead, he crouched beside her cot, touched her shoulder gently. Her eyes blinked open. "Go under," he said. Her face paled. "The cellar?" He nodded. "Now, Hope, take Rosie and Thunder. Don't come out until I say." She hesitated only a second before scrambling up, clutching her doll and wooden horse. Vin helped slide the rag rug aside, then lifted the trap door that led down into the root cellar. Low and cramped, nothing more than a dugout lined with firewood and straw. He'd reinforced it weeks ago with extra timbers and a latch from inside. He prayed it'd hold. Hope climbed down the short ladder, looked up at him with wide, scared eyes. "You'll be okay." Vin forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I've handled worse." She didn't answer, just nodded once and pulled the door shut. He dropped the rug back into place and stood, rifle already in hand. Outside, a voice called out, "Old man, ain't no need to play hero." Vin didn't answer. "We ain't just here for the girl anymore. We know you got the gold. You can't protect both." Vin stepped to the window again. They were spread wide, one moving left around the cabin, another hanging back by the tree line, and the third creeping toward the porch. He didn't wait. He fired once, straight through the window. The man at the tree line dropped, yelping in pain, clutching his leg. The gunfire shattered the stillness. The man on the left returned fire, bullets splintering wood and shattering the top of the water barrel outside. Vin dropped to one knee, took aim again, and fired. The second shot caught the man's shoulder, spinning him back into the snow, but the third man, the one in charge, didn't fire. Not yet. Vin stayed low, breathing hard. The silence was worse than the bullets. Then, floorboards creaked. The bastard was on the porch. Vin moved to the door just as it exploded inward. He threw his shoulder into it, knocking the man back a step, and they collided in the snow outside, fists and elbows, weapons scraping. The outlaw was taller than Vin expected, thinner but wiry. Fast, his revolver went off, grazing Vin's coat. Vin drove his knee into the man's gut, then swung the rifle like a club, cracking it against his shoulder. They broke apart, panting, steam rising from their mouths in the cold. "You're good," the man spat, "but you're alone." Vin didn't speak. He raised his rifle again. But the outlaw was faster this time. He lunged forward, knocked the barrel aside, and tackled Vin to the ground. Snow kicked up around them as they rolled, fists pounding. Vin's rifle skidded out of reach. The outlaw reached for his gun again, cocking the hammer. Vin struggled, bracing himself for the worst. Then a voice, clear and high and brave. "Papa Finn, duck!" Vin didn't think. He dropped flat. The outlaw's head jerked up, just in time to catch a flying tin cup to the face. It clanged off his temple. Distracting, but enough. Vin surged up, grabbed the man's arm, twisted. The gun fired into the air. Vin landed a solid punch to the man's jaw, then another. The third knocked the outlaw into the snow, dazed and gasping. Vin grabbed his rifle from the snow, leveled it. "Don't move." The outlaw didn't. He coughed, blood on his lips, then laughed weakly. "Didn't expect you to have backup." Vin didn't look toward the cabin. He didn't need to. He knew Hope was there, peeking through the slats of the trap door, holding her breath. "She's not part of this," Vin said. The man coughed again, wheezing now, his eyes glassy. "She is. You just don't know it yet." Vin stepped closer. "Where's the rest of your crew?" The man smirked through the blood. "You think it's just us?" Vin said nothing. The outlaw's hand twitched in the snow. Vin pressed his boot to it. "Easy," he warned. The man blinked slowly. His words were quieter now, rasping. "There are more coming, men worse than us. Jack's old brothers in arms. You think they'll stop just because a kid's in the way?" His head lolled to the side. A moment later, he stopped breathing. Vin didn't move right away. Then he turned slowly, back toward the cabin. Hope was standing in the open doorway, pale as snow, still holding Rosie. "I didn't mean to yell," she said, "but I saw him." "You did right," Vin said. "You saved me." She nodded. "Are the bad men gone?" "For now," he said, then looked down at the dead man's face. But not for long. The smoke from the battle had long since cleared, but the tension in the cabin hadn't. For the next 2 days, Vin stayed alert, rifle leaning within reach, even when he sat down to whittle wood or stir stew over the fire. He checked the traps less often. He didn't sleep deeply. And every time Hope so much as stepped toward the window, he told her, gently but firmly, to stay away from the glass. She didn't ask why. She knew. The bloodstains on the snow hadn't melted yet. The shallow graves behind the cabin marked where danger had come and, for now, passed. But that outlaw's final breath echoed louder than any bullet. "There are more coming." Vin knew that kind of talk. It wasn't bluster, it was a promise. He stood out on the porch at dusk, arms folded tight across his chest. The trees whispered secrets with the wind, and something heavy sat on his chest. He'd spent years running from the world, hiding from the pain of losing his daughter, pretending solitude was peace. But now he knew better. Peace was a child's laugh from across the room. Peace was hearing Hope read the word cabin aloud for the first time and smiling shy at his praise. Peace was knowing that girl slept safe while he stood watch. But peace, real peace, wasn't possible here anymore. They had to leave. Back inside, Hope was brushing Rosie's hair with a twig she'd whittled herself, humming off key. Her small feet dangled off the edge of the chair. She looked up when Vin entered, her face soft and expectant. He knelt beside her. "I need to tell you something, little one." She set Rosie down, eyes wide. "Is it bad?" He paused. "No, but it's important." He pulled a worn photograph from the wooden box beneath his cot. It was faded, edges curled. A girl, maybe 10, with a crooked grin and braids that reminded him of Hope. "This was my daughter. Her name was Lila." Hope took the photo gently. "She's pretty." She was. She died a long time ago. Sickness came through our town. Took her and her mama both. Hope looked up at him. Were you all alone? For a long time. She reached for his hand, small fingers wrapping around his rough ones. You're not alone now. He didn't speak. His throat tightened too fast for words. Hope leaned closer, resting her head against his arm. You're my papa now, she said softly. The words, so simple and small, cracked something deep inside him. He didn't stop the tears this time. He let them come, quiet and warm, as he wrapped his arm around her and held on. Later that night, after Hope had fallen asleep curled beside the hearth, Vin opened the trap beneath the floorboards. He brought up the doll in the oilcloth pouch. He laid both on the table, then sat in silence for a long moment. Then he took out the gold. Coin after coin, gleaming in the lantern light. Enough to buy land, cattle, a future. Enough to run. Enough to get killed for. He counted each one, stacking them in neat rows, then wrapped them again, tighter this time, with layers of fabric to muffle any sound. Hope stirred behind him. Papa? He turned. Sorry, sweetheart. Didn't mean to wake you. She rubbed her eyes and walked over barefoot, her hair a halo of sleep. Is that the gold? He nodded. It is, she frowned. Are we going to keep it? He studied her. What do you think? She was quiet a moment. Then, Mama said it wasn't ours. She said it was bad. Vin smiled faintly. She was right. Hope picked up Rosie, then looked at the cut seam along the back, the one they'd opened weeks ago. I can sew her up again, she said. He handed her the needle and thread. She sat at the table, tiny fingers working carefully. Vin watched her, heart twisting. So much had changed. She had changed him. When she was done, she placed Rosie back in her lap and looked at him. What now? He reached across the table, took her hand. We go to town. We give the gold to the right people, and we start over. She blinked. Where? He smiled gently. Anywhere that has a school, a church, and a porch big enough for 2 chairs. She giggled. And a spot for thunder. He nodded. Of course. She leaned in close again. Do you think that's what Mama wanted? Vin looked down at the mended doll, the glowing fire, the girl who had saved his life with a tin cup and a single word. Papa. I think, he said, voice steady. Your Mama's been guiding us this whole way. They sat like that for a while. The storm outside finally passed, and a different kind of stillness settling in. Vin looked at the pouch of gold once more, then at the child beside him, then out into the darkness. We'll go to town, return this gold, and start over, as a family. It took 3 days by sled, another 2 by wagon, and nearly a week by train, but they made it to Denver before the first crocus bloomed. Spring arrived differently here. Less snow, more soot. The city buzzed with carriages, telegraph poles, and people who never made eye contact. For Hope, it was overwhelming. For Vin, it was the first time he'd walked among so many strangers and felt like one of them. He kept his hand firm on her shoulder as they stepped into the granite-walled bank downtown, the cloth pouch tucked safely in his coat. Hope clutched Rosie close, eyes scanning the marble floors like they might shift beneath her. A young man in a pressed vest looked up from behind a polished desk. Can I help you, sir? I'd like to speak to whoever handles stolen property. The clock blinked. Excuse me? Vin didn't flinch. I have gold, belongs to a dead man, and a story that needs telling. It took an hour for a proper official to arrive, a thin man named Hollis, whose spectacles fogged when he opened the pouch and saw the coins. He brought in a deputy marshal and 2 bank examiners. They asked 100 questions. Vin answered everyone, calmly and without shame. He told them about Rachel Brennan, about the winter, about Jack's crimes, the letter, the men who came to kill. He didn't embellish, and he didn't hold back. He told it straight. Hope sat beside him the entire time, silent, clutching Rosie like a lifeline. When it was over, Marshal Tate scratched his chin and said, "You're lucky you lived through this, Mr. Dalton." "I don't believe in luck," Vin said. "Just choices." Hollis nodded solemnly. "You'll be compensated. Not the whole haul, it's evidence, but there's a reward, and a good man shouldn't walk away with nothing." Vin shook his hand, though he hated the feel of inked palms and city politics, but he didn't walk out empty-handed. The reward was real, more than enough to settle elsewhere, to build something lasting. But that wasn't the gold he cared most about. The next stop was a lawyer's office on 17th Street. Clean, quiet, lined with heavy books and thicker silence. The attorney, a woman named Marybeth Quinn, adjusted her silver spectacles and looked over the handwritten affidavit. "You want to adopt the child legally?" she asked. Vin nodded. "Yes, ma'am." "She has no known next of kin?" "None worth mentioning. Her mother's gone. And her father." He paused. "That part's done." Marybeth looked down at Hope, who stared back with those two old eyes. "Do you want Mr. Dalton to be your guardian?" she asked gently. Hope looked at Vin, then back at the lawyer. "I want him to be my papa." That was all it took. 2 days later, in a small judge's chamber behind the county courthouse, Hope stood on a footstool in a green dress a little too big for her, holding Vin's hand as the judge read the declaration. "From this day forward," he said, "you are legally and fully the guardian of this child. Her name shall be recorded as Hope Elizabeth Dalton." Vin's voice caught when he said, "Thank you, Your Honor." Hope just smiled and squeezed his hand tighter. They left Denver the next morning, riding a northbound train with soot-streaked windows and a slow, swaying rhythm. Hope slept most of the way, curled into Vin's side. She stirred once when the train whistled through a narrow pass, mumbling, "Do we have a porch yet?" Vin smiled into the glass. "Not yet," he whispered, "but we will." Oregon was where they chose to go, a place neither of them had been. A town called Pine Ridge, population just under 400, tucked against tall pines and long skies. The postmaster said they had a schoolhouse, a general store, and a preacher who only yelled on Sundays. It sounded like heaven. They rented a cabin at the edge of town until Vin could build his own. He took a job hauling lumber and spent evenings helping Hope practice her letters. She made friends fast, too fast for Vin's comfort. But he let her run with the other girls on Saturdays and splash in the creek when the sun was hot. Sometimes at night they sat on the steps of the rented porch, thunder beside them, Rosie resting in Hope's lap, and watched the stars blink into view. It felt like a new beginning. But far away, beyond the pine-swept valleys and the safety of new names, someone else was watching. He sat in the back of a saloon in Cheyenne, the brim of his hat pulled low. A scar ran from his ear to his collarbone. He lit a match with a flick of his thumb, then touched it to a folded piece of newspaper. Denver. Gold returned. Girl adopted. The match burned slow and steady. He crushed it out, took one last swig of whiskey, and stood. Then he turned to the man beside him and said, "They think it's over. It ain't." The sun rose slow and soft over Pine Ridge, casting golden light across the misted valley. Spring had settled into the soil, and the town wore it well. Blossoms curled along white picket fences, and kids kicked up dust on their way to school. The mountain air still bit cool in the morning, but by midday it warmed, enough for Vin to work outside without his coat. Hope had grown fast, in that way children sometimes do after sorrow. She was taller now, her braids neater, her voice more certain when she read aloud. At 8, she ran through the streets with her school friends, Rosie often tucked under her arm, and every time she introduced herself in town, she said it with pride. "Hope Elizabeth Dalton. My papa's name is Finn." Finn, not Vin. It had started as a slip, something one of the other girls had misheard, but Hope liked the sound of it, and Vin hadn't corrected her. In Pine Ridge, he was just Finn, the quiet carpenter who'd built a porch that wrapped around their whole cabin and brought his daughter flowers on Sundays. But that peace didn't last. The stranger rode into town 3 days after the spring fair. He wore a dark coat, long and dusty, and his horse was lean and scarred like it had been ridden hard for miles. He didn't speak much, just tied his mount outside the saloon and ordered whiskey neat. Folks assumed he was passing through, but Vin's instincts itched. Something about the man's boots, his gloves, the way he watched people without ever looking straight at them. Vin kept his distance at first, but on the second day, the man walked into the general store and asked old Miss Brunner if they sold any dolls. "Dolls?" she repeated. "Not really. Just the rag ones up front. Most girls already have their own. Like Hope Dalton and her Rosie." Vin heard it from behind the counter where he was picking up nails. His whole body went still. The man gave a thin smile. "Dalton, huh?" Next came the schoolhouse. He lingered near the fence, watching the kids as they poured out after the bell. Hope was easy to spot. Her bright blue ribbon, her laugh, that way she turned to wave at the teacher before running down the hill toward the cabin. Vin was already walking across the road when he spotted the man. "Something I can help you with?" Vin asked, voice steady. The stranger smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Just admiring the scenery." "Scenery's got parents around here." "Fair enough," the man said. "Name's Reddick. You're Dalton." Vin didn't nod. "Pretty little girl you got there." "Hope, is it?" Vin stepped in closer. "You got business here, Reddick?" Reddick's grin widened. "Just passing through." But he didn't pass through. He checked into the boarding house that night. Stayed a second day. Asked the barber if the Daltons had moved from back east or farther south. Asked the grocer if Hope was adopted. Asked the blacksmith if anyone around here remembered a woman named Rachel. The questions traveled back to Vin like smoke on the wind. On the third morning, Vin walked into the saloon. Reddick sat at the corner table, the same place every day. The barkeep barely looked up. Vin pulled out a chair and sat. "Let's stop playing." Reddick swirled his whiskey. "I always did enjoy a good game. You know who she is. Why are you here?" Reddick didn't answer at first, just leaned forward, both hands folded like a prayer. "Do you know what it does to a man, watching half his crew get gunned down because some mountain ghost decided to grow a conscience?" Vin's jaw tensed. "She's got Brennan's blood," Reddick continued. "You think changing her name makes that go away?" "She's not him." "No, she's not, but she's his legacy, and there's men out there, men with longer memories than mine, who won't care she's just a kid. She's my daughter now." Reddick chuckled. "That might buy her a bed and a roof, but it won't buy her a clean past. You really think she'll grow up, get married, raise babies, but never wonder who she really is? Who her daddy was? What was hidden inside that doll?" Vin stood slowly. "You stay away from her." "I ain't touched her." "You think this is over?" Reddick's eyes narrowed. "You can't hide who she is forever." The courthouse in Pine Ridge wasn't much. Just a red brick building with peeling white trim, one tall flagpole and a bell that rang once every Sunday. But that day, it was packed tighter than a Christmas revival. Word had spread fast. By the time Vin and Hope stepped through the doors, the pew-style benches were filled with townsfolk, schoolteachers, blacksmiths, shopkeepers, and farmers. People who knew the pair by more than their names. Hope clutched Vin's hand tighter than ever. He squeezed back. At the front, behind a plain oak bench, sat Judge Carlton, an older man with a stern jaw and eyes that had seen too much of the world to be easily moved. On his left stood a well-dressed man from the state attorney's office, collar stiff and expression stiffer. "The matter before us," the attorney began, "concerns the legality of custody granted to one Vincent Dalton over the child Hope Brennan, born of Rachel Brennan and the late Jack Brennan, a known criminal wanted in multiple territories." A murmur ran through the room. Vin said nothing. He stood tall, calm, chin up. His hat rested on his knee. Hope sat beside him, wearing the same pale blue dress she'd worn the day she called him Papa for the first time. Given her biological father's criminal history and the deception surrounding her identity, the attorney continued, we ask the court to consider whether it is in the best interest of the child to remain under Mr. Dalton's guardianship. Judge Carlton looked down over his spectacles. "Mr. Dalton, do you wish to respond?" Vin stood. "I do, Your Honor." He walked to the center of the room, boots slow and steady on the wood floor. He didn't speak right away. When he did, his voice was low, but clear. "Rachel Brennan came to that mountain sick and dying. She had no one else. Her daughter came to me in a snowstorm, crying, asking for help. I gave it." He looked toward Hope, who watched him with wide, wet eyes. "She didn't ask to be born to a man like Jack. She didn't know what was hidden in that doll or what men would come after her for it. All she ever wanted was to be safe, to be loved, and I gave her both." A pause. "She's mine now, not by blood, but by promise." The silence after that was thick. Then, like a spark caught on dry grass, a voice called out from the benches. "I saw him carry her home through the storm," said Miss Bruner, "like she was made of glass." "He fixed our barn after the flood," said Hank Whitlow. "Wouldn't take a cent." "Hope watches my boys when I have to stay at the store," said Mrs. Tiller. "She's like a sister to them." One by one, voices rose. Ordinary folks, rough hands, full hearts. Judge Carlton tapped his gavel once. "That's enough." But it wasn't. Not yet. A little boy stood up near the front, clutching a folded letter. "My pa can't read too well," he said. "So he asked me to bring this." He handed it to the judge, who unfolded the paper. Then another girl brought one, then two more, then 5. Letters from the whole town, signed by dozens, all urging the court to let Hope stay where she belonged. By the time the judge finished reading the last one, even the state attorney had lost some starch in his collar. Judge Carlton adjusted his glasses. "In all my years on this bench, I've never seen a turnout like this. Mr. Dalton, this town believes in you. That child believes in you. And, by God, that's something rare." He cleared his throat. "I hereby move to dismiss the petition to remove Hope from Mr. Dalton's custody. Let this girl stay with the only father she's ever known." The land sat at the edge of town, just past the last row of cottonwoods and a stone's throw from the quiet creek that turned golden at dusk. The mayor called it a gift of gratitude, a parcel granted by the township to a man who had proven, time and again, that kindness could change fate. Vin called it something else. Home. It took him the better part of a year to build it. No shortcuts, no hired hands. Just lumber and grit, the rhythm of hammer and saw echoing over the valley. Every board was measured twice, every corner squared with care. He made the porch wide and deep, big enough for a rocking chair and a little girl to stretch out and count stars. The cabin he'd once sheltered in was still there, tucked up in the hills, but this place was different. This place was chosen. Hope helped where she could, hauling nails, holding beams steady, learning by watching. She was 11 now, taller, with a quiet strength behind her smile. She still kept Rosie near, stitched back together with mismatched thread. And Thunder too, the old wooden horse Vin had carved for his first daughter, now chipped from love but still proud. Life in Pine Ridge had settled into something soft. Hope went to school, took lessons from Miss Bruner on sewing and arithmetic, and began apprenticing with the town's veterinarian, a sturdy woman named Clara, who claimed Hope had gentle hands and a mind that listens. People no longer looked at her with curiosity. She was simply Hope Dalton now, just like her papa. Vin still woke early. Old habits die slow. But now he woke to warmth, to laughter echoing in the kitchen, to the sound of a kettle singing over firewood she'd chopped the day before. He kept a rifle by the door out of habit, but the danger had passed. Reddick had vanished after the court ruling. Some said he was seen in Kansas, others in Arizona. But he never came back. One evening, as the light stretched long across the porch and the sky turned the color of burnished copper, Hope sat beside Vin, knees pulled to her chest. "Do you think Mama sees us now?" she asked softly, voice barely louder than the wind. "And Papa?" Vin didn't answer right away. His gaze lingered on the horizon where the pine trees stood watch like old friends. "I think," he said, wrapping an arm around her shoulder, "they see more than we know." Hope leaned into him. Would they be proud? Vin swallowed. "I know they would." They sat in silence after that, letting the evening settle in around them. Rosie rested at Hope's side, threadbare but still holding. Thunder lay near the porch rail, legs splayed like he'd run across 1,000 dreams. Fireflies blinked in the tall grass. The creek murmured its old song, and above them stars began to appear, one by one, like old souls lighting lanterns on the trail home. Vin looked down at the girl he'd carried through snow, protected through gunfire, and stood beside in court. She was no longer the crying child who had once begged a mountain man to come with her. She was becoming her own story, strong, full of grace, born of pain but shaped by love. He smiled, not because life was perfect, but because it was real, and for the first time in a long time that was enough. Hope tilted her face toward the sky. "What do we do now?" Vin rocked slowly in his chair. "We live. We build. We make this place better than it was when we found it." And they did. Together. As the screen door creaked behind them and the golden light of the cabin spilled out into the evening, Rosie slipped from Hope's hand and landed softly on the porch. Thunder leaned gently against her boot. Vin looked out toward the woods, just in time to see something, or someone, watching from the tree line. But when he blinked, it was gone. Maybe just a shadow, or maybe the beginning of another story waiting to be told. Because out in the west, tales didn't end. They passed from porch to prairie, from wind to whisper, always waiting for someone to listen. So if you followed this far, stay with us. More hearts wait to be healed. More roads need riding. And the legacy of the West, it's only just begun. Subscribe to Western Legacy for the next story in the series. A new family, a new frontier, and a new fight for what's right.